On the 24th of November 1946, a young woman gave birth at the Elizabeth Lund Home for unwed mothers of Burlington, Vermont. Her name was Eleanor Louise Cowell, later known as Louise Bundy, and she was just 22 years old at the time that she became Ted Bundy's mother. She was urged to give up the child as the stigma at the time surrounding a child born out of wedlock extended not only to the unwed woman, but to the woman's family as well. As a compromise, the young woman's parents took in the child and raised him as their own. Louise's mother was subject to bouts of crippling depression, for which she underwent electroconvulsive therapy as treatment. Her father was known citywide to be a violent, drunken man. Neighbours reported him beating his wife, the family dog, and even the neighbours' cats. Ted's mother and her son would move out of the family home when he was just 3 years old, shortly after a recorded incident during which Carol's sister, Julia, awoke one morning to find her bed covered in kitchen knives, and a young Ted smiling at the foot of the bed. In 1951, at a church singles night, Louise Nelson met Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook from Tacoma. Within a year they were married, and within the next couple of years they had 4 more children together. Bundy insisted he grew up in none other than a good, solid Christian home.
Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand it. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. I understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them, certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused, you were not sexually abused, you were not emotionally abused.
No, no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with 2 dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hard.
Those that involve violence.
Yes. Yeah. And this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography, again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now, walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies, didn't it?
Well, in the beginning it fuels this kind of thought process. Then at a certain time it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making it into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film or
film,
photos,
magazines, what have you. Yeah.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say, pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
How long did you stay at that point before you actually assaulted someone?
Well, yeah, you see, that is a very delicate point in my own development, and we're talking about having reached the point or a gray area that surrounded that point over a course of
You don't remember
years.
How long that
was?
was?
I would say a couple of years. And what I was dealing with there were very strong inhibitions against criminal behavior or violent behavior that had been conditioned into me, bred into me in my environment, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school. Things which said, no, this is wrong. Even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say the last vestiges of restraint. The barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly and assailed through the kind of fantasy life that was fueled largely by pornography.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe. the sensation, of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped. That I knew that I couldn't control it anymore. That these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
Would it be accurate to call a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
Well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case, almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been taught. There's the right and wrong that you learned as a child. Mm-hmm. And then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography. And those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and you can summarize it that way, and that's accurate, certainly. And it just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others. Well, but there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Carol Ann Boone met Ted Bundy in 1974 for the first time, right after divorcing her second husband. She was working at the Department of Emergency Services in Olympia, Washington. Their romantic relationship started when Bundy was on trial for murdering 2 women in the Chi Omega sorority house at FSU. She started visiting him frequently. In 1979, the two got married in the courtroom when the trial was going on.
Questioned her about his character. She said he's a kind, warm, patient man, a very positive part of her life. Then the convicted man popped the question.
Carol, do you want to marry me? I want to marry you. And I do want to marry you.
Carol's prison visits to Bundy became more frequent after their marriage, and she would also smuggle drugs to him. She eventually got pregnant, and in October 1981, she gave birth to Rosa Bundy. In 1986, Carol and Bundy divorced, and she and Rose left Florida for Washington. It's been said that Carol was so devastated by Bundy's death row confessions to his murders, having believed he was innocent beforehand. In the days leading up to Bundy's execution, he would finally confess the murders he had committed. January 4th, 1974, Karen Sparks, bludgeoned and sexually assaulted in bed as she slept. She would survive. February 1st, Linda Healy, bludgeoned while asleep and abducted, was then decapitated and dismembered. March 12th, Donna Manson, abducted while walking to a concert. 17th of April, Susan Rancourt, disappeared after attending an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College. May 6th, Roberta Parks, vanished from Oregon State University. 1st of June, Brenda Ball, disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Buren. 11th of June, Georgianne Hawkins, abducted from an alley behind her sorority house. July 14th, Janice and Denise were abducted from Lake Sammamish Skate Park in broad daylight. October 2nd, Nancy Wilcox, disappeared in Holiday, Utah, last seen in what people believe is Ted's car. October 18th, Melissa Smith, vanished from Midvale, Utah, body found 9 days later on a hillside in Summit Park. October 31st, Laura Ann, disappeared from Lay, Utah. November 8th, Carol would escape from Bundy's car and survive. However, Deborah Kent would not. January 12th, 1975, Karen Campbell disappeared from a hotel hallway in Snowmass, Colorado. March 15th, Julie Cunningham, disappeared on the way to a tavern in Vail, Colorado. April 6th, Denise Olofsson, abducted while cycling to her parents' house in Grand Junction. May 6th, Jeanette Culver, only 12 years old, abducted from her junior high school. June 28th, Susan Curtis, disappeared during a youth conference at Brigham Young University. On August 16th, 1975, Bundy was arrested and went to trial for attempted kidnapping Carol DeRanche in February 1976, and after waiving his right to a jury trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Later that year, he would be charged with the murder of Karen Campbell. Serving as his own lawyer allowed him to appear in court during court hearings without leg irons, plus gave him the opportunity to move freely around the courtroom. In June 1977, during a pre-trial hearing, he escaped by jumping out the library window. He was captured a week later. On December 30th, 1977, he would escape from prison again, making his way to Florida, even renting an apartment in the name of Chris Hagen. It's during this time he entered the Chi Omega sorority house and severely beat 4 women, killing 2 of them before attacking another.
In the early morning hours of January the 15th, between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., there was an intruder in the Chi Omega sorority house. He had with him some sort of a wooden club.
As I stepped in, the girls were yelling, "Upstairs, upstairs," and there was a lot of crying. And at the top of the stairs was a girl named Karen Chandler, and she was down on the floor. She was bleeding quite badly from head injuries.
Pretty much every bone in my face was broken. My front teeth were mostly gone.
When I asked her, what had happened, she said there was a loud banging noise. And then she made mention about her roommate, Kathy Klein. Her injuries were much more extensive. Her jaw was actually hanging off on one side. It was only one hinge was still attached, and she was totally incoherent and in shock.
I remember then laying on my bed and trying to talk, trying to say something or scream or anything, and I couldn't make any noise because my jaw was broken in 3 places.
I decided to go ahead and start a room-by-room search. I knocked on the door for Margaret Bowman's room and didn't get a response. I opened the door and I went and I pulled the covers back, and I could see she was strangled and beaten about the head. You could tell she was dead. So I stepped across the hallway, and there was another body in the bed, and that was Lisa Levy.
Lisa Levy was beaten severely about the head and body. She also was strangled.
After this horrendous attack at Chi Omega, he goes just about 4 or 5 blocks away.
He ended up at what we call the Dunwoody residence, which was the residence of Cheryl Thomas.
I was a student at Florida State University, and I was a dance major.
I was living with Cheryl Thomas. I woke up to this loud banging sound. Then we could hear Cheryl moaning, whimpering, and I called Cheryl. We could hear the phone ringing because the wall was so thin, but she wasn't answering her phone, and that's what possessed me to call the police department.
I sent an investigator immediately to that location. She went in and she found Cheryl Thomas on the floor, in blood and beaten.
He came in through my kitchen window. He had worn a hose over his face. He pulled that off, and that was dropped on my floor. If I did not have my neighbors calling, I don't think I would have survived.
Oh my gosh. I mean, he left her for dead.
I remember flashes of things. I basically woke up in intensive care.
My mom told me that there were 2 other sorority sisters and they did not survive the attack. My reaction was, nah, like, that's not right. That didn't happen. That just didn't happen. They're fine.
I could not go to the funeral. I was in the hospital. And so I wanted to call the families and let them know that. And my thoughts were.
On the 9th of February, 1978, Bundy killed again. This time it was 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, who he kidnapped and then mutilated. Within a week of the disappearance of Kimberly, Bundy was arrested.
Murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's weird.
It's too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
I can't begin to understand. Well, I can try, but I'm aware that I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have, and these young women that I have harmed, feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. And I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question, and I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has, and I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself, because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly, again, this kind of violent pornography, where, on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony. We're talking here not just about more. What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me. Going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
Your son's life.
My Christian upbringing tells me that to take another's life under any circumstances is wrong. And I don't believe the state of Florida is above the laws of God. Faith can be very useful in many ways to many people living. Gone from us would be like taking a part of all of us and throwing it away.
Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders was the first trial to be televised and would result in him being found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Ted Bundy would be sentenced to death.
This cause came on before the court and trial by jurying. After deliberation, a verdict was rendered, finding the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy guilty of the following crimes: burglary of a dwelling and assaulting a person therein, to wit Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. Count 2, murder in the first degree, to wit Margaret Bowman. Count 3, murder in the first degree, to wit Lisa Levy. Count 4, attempted murder in the first degree, to wit Karen Chandler. Count 5, attempted murder in the first degree, Kathy Kleiner. Count 6, burglary of a dwelling and assaulting a person therein, to wit Cheryl Thomas. Count 7, attempted murder in the first degree, to wit Cheryl Thomas. After the defendant was adjudicated guilty by the court in each count, which the court has previously adjudicated in each count of the indictment, and the trial jury, after hearing additional matters, rendered and considered an advisory sentence pursuant to Florida Statute 921-141(3). The jury returned and in open court recommended that this court impose a death sentence upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy for the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy.
Needless to say, I think the jury is totally wrong. They didn't take enough time. How could you consider all those momentous decisions in 6 hours? It's just impossible. It's wrong. We'll appeal it. It's just, what else can I say? The family will be devastated by this, but we stick behind him because we know he's not guilty, as do all his friends.
Although Bundy was sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders, it would be his trial in Orlando a year later that sealed his fate. Bundy was again found guilty of murder, this time for the death of Kimberly Leach in Lake City in February 1978. In the final days of his life, Bundy began confessing to his crimes. Ted Bundy was executed via electric chair on January 24, 1989, the infamous serial killer who murdered more than 30 women.
Tell us what triggered all of this. In fact, up until Saturday, I didn't believe any of it.
Louise Bundy was thousands of miles away from her son when he was executed this morning. She says it would have been too painful.
It's a 3-ring circus, if not a 10-ring circus. And we didn't feel the agony we would go through by going down there would compensate for a few minutes of talking to Ted through glass. And he also felt that way too.
Mrs. Bundy always believed her son was innocent, and when he confessed to the killings before his death, she was shocked.
We were angry for a while yesterday, even this morning, that he never confided in us. Of course, if he had, what would we have done then? Mm-hmm. You don't usually go around telling your mom that you've been doing these kinds of things. That I understand, but for 13 years, he's sworn up and down, backwards and forwards, that he was innocent. And then all of a sudden, we believed him, we wanted to believe him. He's still our son, no matter what he's done, and we love him very much.
This video, please take the time to like and subscribe. Thank you.